Without further ado, I just want to just welcome Robert. Most of you will know me, and you'll know that I'm a sales coach. I've been in corporate sales for 30 years. I'm now a visiting lecturer also at Aston Business School. I co-host a podcast called Thrive in Sales. And I want to introduce Robert this morning. Robert's a headhunter. He's been in sales recruitment, particularly for the last 30 years as well. We have met in the past, probably about 20 years or so. Also, Robert, I was thinner then and had brown hair, if you can imagine.
Exactly. Both of us.
Indeed. Robert has placed literally thousands of salespeople into companies like IBM, SAP, Salesforce, really big, high-quality organizations, but more recently has worked with SMEs, smaller organizations, and startups too. Some of his salespeople that he's placed has gone on to do billion-pound deals, and one of his top earners earned over £3 million in a single tax year. So, Robert, very welcome to webinar on Wednesday this morning. So I want to So here's the deal, and I know Steve Durkin's on the call as well, if you don't mind me saying, Steve, a sales veteran too. Robert, we're talking about specifically hiring salespeople. So before we get to the sort of key questions that I want to ask you, can I just ask you, why is hiring salespeople different to other job functions?
And I was thinking about this, and I could come up with a 10 or 20 or 30-minute answer, but the quick answer to that is, first of all, sales, unlike other job types, the performance of a salesperson is unpredictable. With certain jobs, you can follow a certain process, and if you follow that process properly, you're guaranteed a result. But with sales, it's just far more unpredictable. I think that's the first thing. I think when you look beyond that, the other thing being is that the high achievers who are doing well, they don't want to move. And therefore, for a lot of companies, if they're hiring, they're probably looking at people who are in between jobs. And in sales cases, a lot of people who are made redundant or sacked are unemployed because they didn't perform. With regards to a salesperson and their performance, if they're performing well, they're obviously performing well. But if it is that they failed, you've got as much a chance that actually the failure is attributable to the salesperson as it is the company or the circumstance, because there's a whole set of sort of variables involved. So I think it's a difficult, it's a difficult market to recruit into, a role type to recruit into. And I think the other thing being is that with salespeople in particular, you've got to develop a good candidate pool, because there's a lot of people who are salespeople who unfortunately aren't so good. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think so, in terms of the unpredictability. But I also wonder if there's an aspect that, and I certainly don't mean to patronize or demean other job functions, but I'm going to take the role of HR, since I'm married to an HR director. Anyone that knows me will know what an irony that is. But HR is a sort of a fairly understood process. I think to most people, certainly from a cursory standpoint. I wonder if people other than salespeople really understand what's involved in sales. And so I wonder if there has to be a sort of an expertise the other side of the table to understand how to recruit a salesperson, what an effective salesperson kind of looks like, and the predictability or the probability of making a successful hire, not just the hire, but actually hiring someone who's going to go on to be.
I think that sort of brings on two sort of issues. The first of which is that for the majority of sales managers, sales directors, managing directors, they may have hired salespeople in one environment, in other words, at one company. They may have hired 3, 4, 5, 6, but they may not actually have hired across multiple companies and made lots of hires, and therefore may not be familiar with it. I mean, there's some other things that happens with regards to when people are recruiting salespeople. The first of which is the pitch to a salesperson needs to be particularly good, because generally speaking, a good salesperson will be expert at pitching, and therefore their ears will only prick up and they'll only pay attention when they're given a good pitch, and if they're not, they'll be sort of unimpressed. I think the other reason why hiring salespeople is unpredictable and a difficult ask is that actually one of the fundamental qualities a salesperson needs to have is they need to be highly self-motivated, and they need to be persistent, and not all are.
Great shout. Okay.
Can I suggest that it'd be a good time to move on to the first key area?
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. It's a live show. So anyway, so can I just ask you, Ben? So we're going to come at this. There'll be lots of learning that comes out of this for both candidates and for hiring managers, if you like. So from the perspective of the hiring organization, what sort of preparation do you think they need to do in advance?
So, this is almost like where if you don't have the right foundations, you can go and look for the wrong person for the wrong reasons. And what you want to be doing is looking for the right persons for the right reasons. And effectively, there's three things that somebody needs to think about when they're making any hire, and in particular a salesperson. And those are, first of all, what is the company all about, and what are the company objectives? You've then got what's the role that they're hiring all about, and what do they want somebody to accomplish, what are the goals? It's only when you've done that, then you can say, actually, what's the person criteria. In the context of a sales hire, the needs of an organization will vary from one company to another, one sector to another, one level of seniority to another, blah, 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 blah. But effectively, there are a number of dynamics that will affect the nature of the sales challenge, and therefore the quality of the type of person that's to be hired. First of which is the brand power. So if somebody's working for Ford or Microsoft or Google or whatever, when they're going to make a sale, the customer's already heard of their brand. So they don't have to do that hard bit of saying who I am, why I'm calling them, to justify themselves. So you've got different dynamics that affect the nature of sales challenge. The second thing is, what is it that somebody's looking to accomplish? Is it that it's selling into a new name customer base? Is it an existing account portfolio? Or what's the mix? Is it 100% new name? Is it 100% existing accounts? Is it a high value complex product, or is it a low value volume sort of product? All these sort of affect the nature of the person that you'd ultimately be hiring. And then you've got what are the expectations for somebody with regards to a target, the order values, the timescales in which you're wanting something to be done, which all then says, right, this therefore potentially shapes the kind of person that we're looking for. So typically, if somebody was selling something that was of a high value and of a high level of complexity, you probably would associate that with a more mature, more experienced person. Conversely, if something was of a lower value with a lower level of complexity, with a higher intensity, in other words, higher volume, you might associate that with a younger person. In all cases, there's an importance for an energy. And I think when an organization is looking to hire, that they need to look at their own business, not just be looking at the candidate perspective. When they do so, they may want to think about a sort of SWOT scenario. What are, as our company, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? And what does that mean in the context of the nature of the sales challenge? And what does that mean in the nature of the kind of person that we're looking for? And once somebody comes on board in their pathway going forward, then how may the nature of the job unfold in the context of the different things to be done?
You've just reminded me, actually, to your point on generally high value means more complex, lower value, perhaps more intensity, but less complex. There are exceptions to that, and hopefully everyone's got a really straight. And actually, I think the intellectual effort for a hiring company is to, and I had this conversation with someone yesterday morning, is to distill what they sell into very simple bite-sized chunks so that both candidates can understand, but also prospects can understand as well. And my point being is I did quite a big software outsource deal with Vodafone a few years ago, which was worth a lot of money, but in reality was a really simple value proposition. It was basically your mess for less. And that's not desperately scientific. And there's some nodding heads, and they will recognize that dynamic. And conversely, when I was at Lancaster University Management School doing a turnaround project a couple of years ago, that was an $80,000 sale. It was a master's program. I didn't even know you could spend $80,000 on a master's program, but apparently that's just the drop. That's a drop in the ocean compared to some. But when I asked the academics that ran this absolutely really interesting program, why do people come on your master's program? No one can actually tell me. No one can actually tell me why people came on the program. Why would someone spend? So I had to go out to people that had previously been on it to find out, why did you come on it? What benefit? So I had to do all that work. So if the academics, if the hiring managers can't explain, why people buy their stuff, that's really, really, how are you going to make the right hire? Just fortunately.
Yeah, I think that applies to when companies are onboarding people. That you've talked about breaking it down to bite-sized chunks. I refer it to when they're onboarding people to be in the situation whereby if you take every single sort of area that may come up with when they start talking to customers, and you say, right, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? So the conversational thread will go in a certain way. It will have certain interruptions, dynamics, variables, and effectively you can, when you're onboarding somebody, you should do lots of role plays so that when the salesperson's out there, that actually they're going to have the answers to the questions because they've been prepped and done their work. Coming back to the preparation issue, once an organization sort of thought about what the nature of the hiring challenge is, they can then think about the person criteria. And there's 7 points that might sort of influence the person criteria and things that you might want to put on a sort of shopping list or checklist. So typically you look for product or marketplace experience. So that'd be the first thing. Second thing is you need somebody with a level of intellect that's appropriate with the solution being sold. So if somebody was selling sort of furniture or something that's arty, that would be one thing. But if they're selling aerospace engines for an aircraft, they're going to need to be quite technically heavy. So you've got an intellect that's sort of associated. The third thing being, it's of course you're looking for somebody who's already proven, unless you're looking for a trainee, so you're looking for a proven track record. Fourthly is that salespeople perform best, and anybody performs best in a job when they've got an affinity with the subject or the job area. So effectively, by and large, any hire that you're going to make for a salesperson, if the salesperson's interested in that subject, in that product area, in that marketplace area, they're going to be more engaged with it. They're going to be more effective. We've then got some, the fifth points would be emotional intelligence qualities, and these would be in respect of empathy, and they'd be in respect of ego drive. On an empathy basis, that's relationship building, understanding, looking to tune into customers' requirements. Also, empathy goes hand in hand with being curious about people. If you're looking to hire a good salesperson, that good salesperson needs to be curious about the whole world, okay? Because they need to be constantly developing. Security is key. The ego drive thing is all about motivation, persistence, and generally speaking, it's the motivation that's going to drive a salesperson to be repeatedly successful despite the obstacles that they'll sort of come across. So then the sixth point would be that having a bias match. So a bias match might be, is the job a new business role? Is it an account management role? It is a large accounts role, an SME role. And there may be other dynamics that attach itself to that, but most sales roles will have some sort of bias, and is there a match with that? And then the seventh point, this comes back to thinking about your company and what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. For most jobs, there's going to be a biggest challenge. Okay? So what is the biggest challenge of the job that you're hiring into? And when you're making the hire, the salesperson needs to be well suited to being able to tackle, handle, succeed in that biggest challenge area. So a big challenge area might be we need lots of leads, or a big challenge area might be influencing a power base and being capable of engaging with a finance director, a HR director, a manufacturing director, or whatever. So
it's really good. And just on that very last point, I just wonder, from a candidate's perspective, how do they uncover, if you'd like, because I think all hires are two-way streets. The company needs to buy the salesperson, if you like, but the salesperson equally needs to buy just as equally into the company. There needs to be a mutual coming together, if you like. How does the salesperson uncover the sort of tariff or burden of that particular, what makes that role hard to do? How do they uncover that in your eyes?
So now you're talking about the salesperson's perspective. Can we come on to that in a minute?
Sure.
Because that dovetails in nicely with the concept of interviewing. But we've just been talking about, prep. If anybody's got any questions, we can take a question or two. If not, we'll move on to the next area, which is interviewing.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to pause for a second if anyone wants to drop a question into chat. It looks as though we're solid. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so
so with regards to with regards to interviewing, what we're talking about is best practice. And if you want to hire well, then there's a number of things you can do in the interview process to make sure you hire well. Strangely enough, what I've often found as a headhunter is, don't forget, I've employed people myself. I train people up myself in selling. Okay, so I've had the first-hand experience. But what I found particularly as a headhunter is that when I'm dealing with candidates, often I'll have 30 phone calls with somebody, and I'll meet with them, and I may have met with them several times. Whereas from an employer's perspective, often they're making a hire on the basis of one meeting, potentially two meetings. So if you want to be smart about hiring, why not actually turn your touch points, your interactions with the candidates, instead of making it two, into maybe 5 or 6. And the first way in which you can do that is actually by getting on the phone to somebody, rather than just inviting them in for a meeting or doing an email exchange. So you can have a chat with them on the phone, potentially reflect on it afterwards, but most importantly, you can see what they sound like on the phone. Okay? Do they sound convincing? Do they sound energized? Do they sound like the right kind of person? So then, with regards to a first interview, and this is going to come on to something you said a second ago, with regards to a first interview, most people don't necessarily know how to structure an interview. And here's what I would suggest. The first of which is that you need to set a context and set a sort of agenda. You then want to basically talk about the candidate's past, or let's say get the candidate talking about the past even better, then have them talking about the present, and then have them talking about the future. In other words, there's a logical flow. And then you have a sort of Q&A kind of session. So, what I would normally do with somebody is as soon as they come in, I'll say to them, what I'd like to do with you today is to, first of all, talk about the opportunity, then talk about you, talk about your background, talk about your past, what your current situation is right now, the present, and then also what your expectations of life are as we move forward into the future. And then at the end, we can have a Q&A session. So the first thing I would like to talk about today is the nature of the opportunity. But, okay, now this is the important thing, okay? But instead of talking about the opportunity, now would be a really good time to bring the candidate, throw back to the candidate the scenario. So to ask the candidate, just before I tell you about more about the company and more about the job, first of all, I'd like to get an understanding as to why don't you tell me what you know about the opportunity thus far, from what you've been able to gather thus far from any advert or any conversations with a recruiter, or from conversations we may have had on an email thread or research you've been able to do. And in that situation, somebody has either had the time to do some prep, or they've not had the time to do any prep. If they have the time to do some prep, then you can see firsthand how well do they communicate an idea or a set of information. And if they've not had time to prepare, it's not the end of the world, because people, if they're employed and they're busy, they may have come in at short notice. It's not the end of the world at all. But importantly, it gives us the opportunities to see how they think on their feet. And in addition to this, by asking this question early, it allows us, a bit from our perspective as the interviewer, to think, what do I think of the person? What do I think of their answer? My initial impressions, am I sure that this is an hour-long interview that I want to do? Or would I rather be maybe thinking, I might want to cut this down to 30 minutes because I'm not sure, okay? Or maybe I'm completely unsure, maybe it might be 20. With regards to a sales candidate, if I'm doing a full hour-long interview, I'll basically ask them about their family background and things like that, which tunes into their motivations. Then I'll ask them as how they came to get into sales. What is it they like about selling that sort of keeps them in it? And I'll start talking through their background. You've got to take control, okay? As the interviewer, you've got to take control, and you've got to keep moving them along. Otherwise, it's going to be an hour and a half. They're going to talk about all sorts of rubbish. Okay, you want the information that you want, not necessarily for what they want. I'll come back to something else in a second. So when you're asking them what they were doing, where they were doing it, talking them through their career history, talking through some of their accomplishments, then you're going to start immediately tuning into things that they're saying that they enjoyed. And they'll say, I enjoyed this, or I didn't like this, or I left this company for this reason, I moved to this company for this reason. And slowly but surely, this is really important, their motivations are going to come out, okay? Consistent themes are going to come out, okay? And it's these motivations and consistent themes that are going to basically give you indications. Is this a good match? Is this going to be a good hire for me? Or are we sort of seeing, red sort of, flags? In talking with the candidate at a first interview scenario, you do want to find out what's their track record, how have they performed against target in the last 3 years, what were the targets each year, and exactly how well did they do. So when you're interviewing the candidate, you're looking for the consistent themes. You're also looking to start tuning into how motivated do you think this person is, and importantly, how energized they are, because selling is a difficult job. People are going to come across lots of objections. It's fine coming across lots of objections for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but what if you're coming across them for 3 months or year in, year out? So those are my thoughts with regard to first interviews. Before I move on to second interviews, any questions?
Is there anything, so you talked about red flags just then, and I understand what that means, but can you give me an example where you've heard a red flag before, which has thought, no, this is not the person for us? Can you give me an example of that?
I mean, would there be loads of them? And the important thing here is actually noticing that they're repeated themes, but they might be, so the one you'd come across most frequently, you come across one most frequently, that somebody's either something, well, actually either or both, which is either they want to do a new business selling job, or they want to do an account management job, or they want to do a bit of both. So some salespeople will say, I'm a hunter, I like new business selling, I like winning new clients, that's what I like, and I don't want to be farming or sitting on existing companies. I love the thrill of the chase. And others will say, I don't like new business, or it wasn't very good there were no leads, and I'm a relationship builder, I prefer account management, I think I'm good at handling existing customers, so they're an account manager. Some will say, I like a bit of both, okay? And if it is that your job is one or the other, it obviously potentially includes or excludes people according to their preferences. Those are really the most significant ones. You could come across all sorts of others, which could be, I don't like working in big companies, I don't like long selling cycles, I don't like this, that, and the other, but those are the most important ones.
Okay, thank you. While we're on this subject, is there, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to dump them in the chat or come off of mute and fire in a question. But if not, I'm happy to move on to the next phase. We're looking at a best practice. What does a best practice interview look like? Robert, we've covered a bit of this already, but perhaps we want to major on this just now.
Yeah, so what we're not now talking about is second subsequent interviews. And when you first interviewed somebody, you probably would be in a situation whereby there may be areas that you didn't cover, or there might be areas that you've got some concern about. And at the second interview, obviously, you want to delve more deeply into those sort of areas. At the second interview stage, you ideally want the candidate to be meeting more than one person. And during the course of hiring somebody, really, you probably should be looking for 3 or more perspectives. And if you're a small business, that might be yourself plus another director. And depending on the company size, you may even want to take some outside counsel from a friend. I've had clients who've interviewed people from me. I've had investors who've hired from me, who in the investor company there may have only been 5 people. In the investor, they've been making a big hire of a sales director, and the investor has chosen to get another opinion from somebody else in his people network, and that's been fine. But multiple perspectives are important. What we're talking about is what's best practice. What we're talking about is what's known to work well. Okay? And there's some things that work particularly well at the second final interview stage, and those are to do with role plays. And those role plays tend to come in 2 sorts of scenarios, one of which is a role play, the other which is a presentation. So if it's a role play, typically the company that's hiring would give a scenario to the salesperson interviewing, and that might be a theoretical meeting with a customer, or it might be actually typically a closing situation where maybe they're presenting to the customer, and how would they go about pitching, how would they go about questioning, how would they go about presenting to the customer. This is unbelievably good because it allows you to see what's the thought process of the salesperson. If the salesperson's at a second or third interview stage, you'll be able to actually see by their preparation as to actually how keen they were. It can also get them closer in towards you because they research your company more and things like that. So how would they be going about selling your sort of, your sort of product? So you effectively got a role play, which is typically the best way in which to sort of assess somebody's capability. The other thing an organisation would do is often they'd say to somebody, how would they best approach their first 100? How would they approach their first 100 days? And that's quite a good one. There's no reason, by the way, that you couldn't do all of these. Okay, so you could do a role play and how would they approach their first 100 days. The first 100 days allows you to potentially see a consensus, or let's say achieve a consensus, that they're planning on approaching their first 100 days in one way. Well, what if you thought they were wrong? Okay, or what if you thought they needed some additional support, or you spotted something else you needed to change? So best practice also would say that at the end of that, the salesperson then would also say, just 5 minutes, what they think that they bring to the party, why they think they're a good candidate for the job, and why the job and the opportunity appeals to them.
So I really like that. One of the reasons I really like that is there's a great phrase my mother used to tell me, which is, people are like tea bags. You drop them in hot water and you get to taste their real flavour. So I really like the I love the idea. My mother, a very wise woman, but it never ceases to amaze me the amount of times where salespeople who tend to be people anyway will say charming with a small c. Some are more than others, and they tend to be quite easy to get along with, at least at first pass. But the number of interviews which end up being, tea and biscuits and a pleasant chat with no real qualification of the candidate. And so, I mean, I believe in hire slow and fire fast. Now, that may sound brutal, but there is nothing more disruptive than making a bad sales hire, because they are your coalface with your customers, and making a bad sales hire, your reputation is on the line with them from day one. So hence, I like the idea.
I think that's an appropriate point for me to mention something else. I think when I look back at the hires that I've been behind, those 97 into IBM, and of the 97 into IBM, there were just 2 that failed in the first 12 months. So why was it so low? Was it because I'm superb? Probably not. I'd like to think I'm very good. I think that sometimes you're in a situation whereby with big companies, you potentially can have a lower failure rate than with smaller companies. I think the point I'd like to stress here is that in reality, 55 to 60% of the sales hires that most businesses are going to make are going to succeed, and 45% are probably going to fail. Okay? And therefore, I think that when you're hiring salespeople, I think you maybe need to set an expectation for yourself that says, what if? And when a salesperson succeeds, it can be attributable to them. When they succeed, it can be not attributable to them. When they fail, it can be attributable to them. When they fail, it can be actually down to something that's wrong with the company or wrong with the products. We were talking about second and subsequent interviews, and we were talking about the key qualities that are required when making a sales hire. So effectively, once you've gone through a first and a second interview, you can then go about benchmarking a candidate against the key criteria. So we talked originally at the start of the conversation with regard to preparation, identifying the qualities required in the candidate. I suggested 7, and I think that you would want to work out what the most important 5 or 6 or even 7 would be. So it needs to be a manageable number. Often when HR people are making a hire and they've come up with a job spec for salespeople, I've seen them, they've got 30 points on the list. You can't assess somebody about 30 points. You've got to assess on what's most important. And with regards to, so you'd effectively tune in to identify 5, 6, 7 absolute max, okay, the key qualities that you think somebody needs in order to perform well in the job. Then you can go about benchmarking the candidates you've interviewed against those criteria, okay? And I would suggest that you benchmark them on the following basis. We've effectively got a scale of 0 to 5, okay? So we'll start at the bottom and we'll get to the positives. So the bottom is, it's unacceptable. They've got lots of weaknesses or no experience in the area at all. So that's 0, okay? 1, okay, is that this is very flaky. You've got lots of doubts. It's not an area of strength. There's no substance there at all. We're then into something that's satisfactory. Okay, now we're now talking satisfactory, average. Nobody wants to hire average. Okay, so satisfactory means that they sort of meet the standard. You then got good. Okay, so now we're at 4. Okay, on a scale of 0 to 5, we're now at 4. Okay, good would mean that they meet the standard well. We've now got 5. Okay, 5 would mean that they're excellent. Okay, this is a really good person. They could possibly even train. They could possibly write a manual. That this person does everything well. So effectively, using these benchmarking points against the key criteria, you can pragmatically look at somebody and say, in what areas are they a good candidate strength to us? Are there areas in which we want to, that we think there's a concern? When you're making sales hires, or any hire, companies don't employ perfect people. Candidates don't take perfect jobs. Okay, so perfect would be 100%. The reality is that companies employ people who are 70 to 80% of expectation. Okay, candidates take jobs that live up to 70, 80% of expectation. What you ideally want to do is to hire people 80% rather than 70%. What you don't want to do is to hire people who are beneath 60%. Okay? And what you don't want to do is to compromise on the area of energy, determination, enthusiasm, sort of things like that.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great framework. Thank you very much for that. And if you could package up somebody who's, shall we say, inexperienced, never made a sales hire before. We've gone through some of those points now, but what if you could wrap it up in one sentence? What is the sentence of advice that you would give them?
I think if I could do it, then I wouldn't be here talking to you. I'd be a billionaire. I'd be living in the Caribbean. I'd have bought Richard Branson's island because I believe it was up for sale. I suppose in reality, you've asked a question. I wasn't expecting it. You really are a hard person. I'll never forgive you. But actually, I have got an answer for this, which actually, if you want to, is to talk with other people and to seek other people's opinions. And whether or not we're talking about making a hire or anything else, I think the older we get, the smarter hopefully we become, and the more prepared we're to talk about our own shortcomings and seek the opinions of others. And I think that you put it quite well there. You said hire slow, fire fast. Now, the hiring fast is a different subject, but in the context of seek other people's opinions. I think we're now moving on nicely to the final area, which was green and red flags. And if you don't mind, I'll just shoot from the hip because we can then bring in some questions and answers. So I'm going to talk about some of the things which I think are important for people to understand. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I do. So sometimes somebody who's making a hire will be faced with somebody they think is a good candidate, who's senior, and they're hiring a sales manager into a sales role, okay, which generally speaking is going to be 95%, 99% of the time, it's just not going to work. I have come across, sales directors who don't want to manage people, who don't like managing people, who have earned more money in selling because of commissions. But, I've done this, I've made thousands of hires. I promise you, it's very rare that you're going to come across that. The majority of the time, if somebody's a manager now and they want to take a sales role, it's probably because they're out of a job. And you're probably going to make a very big mistake. Going the other way, if you're looking to promote somebody upwards who's a junior, if they've got lots of enthusiasm, it's probably a better way to do it. But don't forget, they're going to need a lot of support. The other thing you need to be careful of, and of course, we're moving into a virtual world. But if somebody's not close to your office, then that creates a problem. So obviously some companies will have geographic dispersed sales forces. By default, they're obviously therefore big, and therefore they're established, and that's for them. But for companies who are wanting salespeople who are going to be working from their office or in proximity to the office, and I appreciate we're COVID, I appreciate we've got video conferencing, but you want to hire people who are going to be happy coming into the office. You don't want to hire people who are going to think, oh, it's a 2-hour trek in. Okay, you don't want to hire people who are going to give you an expense bill for £500 each time they come into the office, coming from Taunton to London or something like that. So and also ideally you don't want somebody who's going to be, for argument's sake, in Cornwall, your customers are in London, and each time they go to see a customer, it costs you a fortune. They can only make so many calls in a day. So, I appreciate we're going into this virtual reality world, but nonetheless, it's an important thing. The other things that I sort of work on basis on, and mine relate to me and what I do, but if somebody's had more than 3 employers in the last 5 years, for me, they're not a candidate. Okay. For me, I'll also look as to what's their track record. And if they've performed to target or above target in 3 or more of the last 5 years, then by definition, their performance was above average. If they've not done that, by definition, their performance was below average. Okay. And I know this is taking a bit of a scientific perspective. When somebody recruits from me, they're going to pay a big fee. I'm going to make sure they get something. that's really, really good. But that's something people need to look at, is the the stability and the success in a track record.
That's a really good shout. And so I was quite curious, actually. Your benchmark of 3 out of the last 5 years being above target. I'm not sure if it's pleasantly or otherwise, but a little bit surprised. I thought you'd be going for either 5 years or certainly 4 years. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, basically, what I'm saying is that if you're hiring, you're wanting to hire somebody that's good. And for someone like me, if I'm charging a fee, I need to charge something that's good. So the first thing I'm talking about is a set of maths, okay, that differentiates between somebody who's below average and somebody who's above average. Yeah. But I think when we look beyond that, and to have somebody perform 4 out of 5 years or 5 out of 5 years, let me give you some analogies here. When I left corporate world and I came into recruitment ages and ages ago, I'd been given a task which was to go and win a load of accounts, and I went and won a load of accounts, and one of the accounts I won was a company called Allied Lines, and their annual spend in today's equivalent would have been 5 or 10 million pounds. And no sooner had I won the account, which was a framework agreement, they'd lost a load of money on overnight trading. In other words, the circumstances changed within a few weeks, and therefore they were going to spend nothing. So all the effort was, so basically, my point being is that the salespeople will always be subject to a certain amount of luck. And somebody could be selling into a marketplace, a company could get acquired. So things go wrong. I'll give you another example. So somebody I know, she was working for a company, they had a manufacturing plant, the manufacturing plant caught fire, so all of a sudden they couldn't deliver product. So, are the salespeople going to perform? No, they're not. Okay. So, then you've got family illnesses and things that can happen, but it's not realistic to think that a salesperson's going to achieve target each and every year. I'm now going to give you another example. The guy who earned 3 million, okay, he didn't always hit his targets, the reality is with a lot of salespeople, they're sometimes coming into a risk environment, and sometimes the dice are going to fall for them, and sometimes they're going to go against them. So, and the other thing that I've even drawn another analogy, and forgive me for talking about computers, but when I talk about computers, everybody knows what I'm talking about, because if I talk about Dell, so let's say Dell has got 40% market share, and they've probably got something like 40% market share. We'll call it 30% market share. But if the annual spend in a geographic region or in an account, okay, is 100 million, then actually that person, Dell, by default, should be getting 30 million. I'm going off track. Okay, just coming back on track. We were talking about red flags and green flags, and when you're interviewing a salesperson, you want for that person to be enthusiastic, because if they're enthusiastic with you, they're going to bring the energy into the room with the client. If it is that they're indifferent, why are they indifferent? If they're not animated, why are they not tuning into it? That can be a red flag for 2 reasons. One is they may be a low reactive personality, a low energy personality. If they can't inspire you, how can they inspire your customers? If they're indifferent, it potentially might mean that they're not that keen on your opportunity, and you want somebody who's going to be really keen on selling your thing. We haven't talked about motivation of a salesperson to earn, and with a lot of salespeople, it's not just a matter of hiring salespeople because they want to earn. Often it's a matter of hiring salespeople because they want to win. And when you look at different salespeople and why they want to win, I think there's probably 3 sorts of motivations that I sort of tune into. One is earnings, one of which is motivation to win, and one of which is a lot of salespeople see their job as being like playing a game of chess, that they're fascinated by it, and they like to understand the customer, understand potentially the fit of their solution, how their solution might add value to the customer, and they see themselves as adding value. And the best salespeople are going to be those people who probably got all of those, sort of qualities, that they are empathetic, tuned into the customer, seeing it as something that's mentally engaging, proud of what they do, motivated to win, motivated to earn.
Yeah, got that. And going back to the 3 out of 5 years of above target, and it's always worth probing around that area. I am reminded of my days at EDS and working in an environment where often you only win 1, maybe 2 deals a year. It's a low volume, high financial value sort of environment, if you like. By agreement with my manager, I wasn't going to sell anything in one particular year because we were positioning ourselves one particular client where there was going to be a couple of false starts. So I was predicting a 0. You need to have, but that didn't play well on my CV the next couple of years, other than the following year, again, under tutelage and support of my management, I was 1,700% of target for that particular year. So my sales manager had to manage his team accordingly so that he could exceed his target, whilst knowing that me and probably 1 or 2 others were not going to deliver at all, but for good reasons. And I think that shows why you need to delve below this.
The point that was made earlier about understanding the context in which you're hiring and shaping what you're doing about that, and also the need to talk with other people and get different perspectives. I think that when I thought about the conversation we're going to have today, that we've had today, I've covered most of the points that I thought, I wanted to make sure that I covered. And so if somebody's got some questions, both you and I would love to know what they
are. Well, we're all being very reserved at the moment, and there's very rarely someone that wants to go first. And often, Robert, I've found that I'll get an email afterwards with, I really wanted to ask this question, and but just a little bit uncomfortable for whatever reason. So if anyone, but also if I'm honest, if anyone's like me on the rest of the call, I kind of feel like I've been drinking from the fire hose, to use that old expression. So a number of people may want to take some time to reflect. This recording will go up when I've done the necessary to it, and they may come back with some questions later on, which segues me, if I may say so.
Let's see what people got to say. Come on.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm not sure I understand. Nor am I. Sorry about that, Siri doing its thing. Right, so that could have been really embarrassing. Anyway, so that brings us on really neatly, great segue into, just in case people want to get a hold of you, Robert, what is the best way to make contact with you, please?
I think if they look me up on LinkedIn and they look up Robert Tearle, T-E-A-R-L-E, there's only like 2 or 3 Robert Tearles on LinkedIn, and there's only one person that's a headhunter, and you recognise my photo anyway. So yeah, get in touch with me via LinkedIn.
Okay, fantastic.
Also, just on the subject, before we go on, if somebody goes on to roberttearle.com, Tearle.com, roberttearle.com, they'll see a featured section. In the featured section, there's a load of hiring frameworks. There's a job spec framework. There's a interviewing framework. There's a first 100 days framework. There's loads of stuff there for you.
Wow. Okay, that's a fantastic amount of information. Again, Robert, thank you so much for giving up your time and coming on the webinar today. I really hope for those, and I know some people were couldn't tune in from the start of the meeting. So welcome along, Naomi and Julia as well. If you have got any questions,
thank you for having me. Yes, thank you.
You can drop me a line, keith@salesmarvel.co.uk. Once again, Robert, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone else for tuning in. I'll do the necessary, get the recording converted and all of that. Send you a copy of the link afterwards as well. That'll be probably tomorrow in reality by the time I get to that. But thank you everyone for your time. I really hope you've enjoyed it. and the next one will be next Wednesday. If I'm honest, I can't remember the subject, but I'll include it in the follow-up email. Thanks everyone. I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you again really, really soon. Take care.